I believed life would give me a sign. Not something mystical. Not a miracle. Just a clear moment where everything would align and make sense. A feeling. A certainty. A signal that would tell me, now. Now you can choose. Now you can act. Now you won't regret it. So I waited. 10 seconds into this confession, here is the truth I avoided for most of my life. I didn't lose my life because I ignored signs. I lost it because I kept waiting for one. I told myself this was wisdom. That rushing leads to mistakes. That acting without certainty ruins lives. I watched others make impulsive decisions and struggle, and I promised myself I would be different. I would be careful. I would be aware. I would wait until it was obvious. That approach felt intelligent. Responsible. Mature. No one warned me that waiting for clarity can become a way to avoid living. The sign was supposed to come before everything important. Before choosing a path. Before committing to someone. Before taking a risk that couldn't be undone. I told myself that when the moment was right, I would feel it unmistakably. A sense of alignment. A calm confidence. A feeling that said, this is it. So when that feeling didn't arrive, I interpreted it as information. Not yet. Life offered opportunities quietly. A chance to step into something uncertain. A relationship that asked for presence instead of potential. A direction that required me to commit before understanding the outcome. Each time, I paused. I analyzed. I waited. I looked inward for confirmation. It never came. At first, waiting felt harmless. I was young. Time felt abundant. Delays felt strategic. I told myself I was gathering experience, learning, refining myself. In reality, I was deferring responsibility. Waiting became my default response to anything that scared me. I said things like, I'll know when it's right, and I don't want to force it, and I just don't feel the sign yet. Those phrases sounded thoughtful. No one challenged them. They also protected me from having to choose. Years passed like this, quietly. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing collapsed. My life looked stable from the outside. I progressed just enough to feel productive, just slowly enough to avoid committing to anything irreversible. I stayed in between. Between choices. Between identities. Between versions of myself. I began to notice something unsettling. People around me moved forward without signs. They chose imperfectly. They committed with doubts. They failed, adjusted, tried again. They didn't look certain. They looked alive. I told myself they were reckless. That they would regret it later. That my patience would pay off. But late at night, alone, I felt a quiet anxiety I couldn't explain. A sense that I was missing something essential while waiting for permission that never arrived. The sign I was waiting for became more abstract over time. I couldn't even define what it would look like anymore. Just a feeling I assumed would be unmistakable. But the absence of that feeling started to feel less like guidance and more like silence. I began to suspect something I didn't want to admit. What if there is no sign? What if clarity doesn't precede action, but follows it? That thought unsettled me deeply. Because it meant I hadn't been patient. I had been hiding. Hiding behind the idea that life would eventually make the decision for me. That the universe, or timing, or intuition would step in and remove the burden of responsibility. I didn't want to choose wrong. So I chose nothing. The cost of that choice was subtle at first. I didn't feel regret immediately. Regret takes time. It needs distance to become visible. What I felt instead was stagnation. Days blended together. Milestones felt hollow. I struggled to remember when something last truly mattered to me emotionally. I could explain my life, but I couldn't feel it. I realized that waiting had become my identity. I wasn't someone moving towards something. I was someone waiting to be told where to go. And the most frightening part? The longer I waited, the harder it became to imagine choosing at all. Because choice requires belief, belief that your decision matters enough to act without guarantees. And I had spent years training myself to believe the opposite. One evening, standing alone, I felt the weight of time more clearly than ever before. Not as panic. As understanding. The sign I was waiting for hadn't been delayed. It had never been coming. And I didn't yet know what that meant for a life built entirely around waiting. Once the idea settled that the sign might never come, my waiting stopped feeling patient. It started feeling intentional. I replayed years of my life with that new understanding, and suddenly everything looked different. Moments I had labeled, not the right time, revealed themselves as moments I hadn't wanted to carry responsibility for. Choices I had postponed weren't unresolved, they had been quietly declined. I hadn't been listening for a sign. I had been asking for permission. Permission to act without guilt. Permission to choose without regret. Permission to fail without blaming myself. Waiting had allowed me to avoid all three. I realized how convenient the idea of a sign really was. As long as I believed one was coming, I could stay suspended. I could tell myself I wasn't afraid, just attentive. Not passive, just cautious. But caution doesn't last forever without turning into avoidance. The fear sharpened when I began to see how many decisions had already been made without me. Not actively, but by default. Time chose where I lived. Circumstances chose what I did. Other people's priorities shaped my days. I had been waiting for direction while life was quietly assigning me one. That realization made my chest feel tight. I wasn't living the wrong life. I was living the leftover one. I noticed how often I justified inaction by saying I didn't feel ready. Ready emotionally. Ready financially. Ready mentally. The definition of readiness kept changing, always staying just out of reach. And that's when something clicked. Readiness wasn't something I was approaching. It was something I was using. Using to keep myself safe from commitment. Because commitment means consequence. It means you don't get to step back and say this doesn't count. It means the outcome belongs to you, even if it hurts. Waiting had protected me from that ownership. But it had also protected me from meaning. I started noticing the physical sensation of waiting. A low-level tension in my body. A constant background alertness, as if I were standing at a station, watching for a train that never arrived. Always preparing to move, never moving. That tension followed me everywhere. I couldn't relax fully. I couldn't invest fully. I couldn't arrive fully. My life felt provisional. I thought about the relationships I had kept in a state of almost. The jobs I had treated as temporary even after years. The dreams I spoke about vaguely so they wouldn't demand action. I had lived as if my real life was scheduled to begin after confirmation. But confirmation never came. Instead, time kept moving, quietly erasing the context in which those choices once existed. People changed. Circumstances shifted. Opportunities expired without confrontation. There was no moment where a door slammed shut. It just stopped being there. That frightened me more than any clear rejection could have. Because I couldn't blame anyone. I had waited those doors into disappearance. The anxiety I felt now wasn't about choosing wrong. It was about choosing at all. I realized I had become deeply uncomfortable with the idea that my life could be shaped by my own imperfect judgment. That there would be no external authority to validate my decision. No sign to point to later and say, I was guided. It would just be me. And that terrified me. Because if I chose and regretted it, I would have no one to blame. No timing. No sign. No fate. Just myself. But another thought followed closely behind. If I never chose, would also have no one to credit for a life that felt empty. Waiting had already given me that result. I felt a shift in my fear. For the first time, waiting felt more dangerous than acting. I began to sense that the sign I was waiting for wasn't external at all. It was the moment when the cost of inaction finally outweighed the comfort of delay. And that moment was approaching. I could feel it in the way time pressed heavier. In the way my excuses sounded thinner. In the way my life felt increasingly narrow despite all the options I claimed to have. I was reaching the edge of a realization I could no longer soften. There was never going to be a sign that told me what to do. There was only going to be a moment where I accepted that choosing blindly was better than waiting perfectly. I wasn't ready yet. But I was close. And for the first time, I understood that readiness was never the requirement. Courage was. The moment I stopped waiting for a sign wasn't heroic. It was humbling. I understood, finally, that there would be no confirmation sent in advance. No internal voice clearing its throat to announce certainty. No sudden calm that would make the risk disappear. There would only be a choice, and the consequences of owning it. So I stopped asking life to reassure me. I chose without feeling ready. Not recklessly. Not blindly. But without permission. The instant I did, fear surged, sharper than anything I had felt while waiting. Because this time, there was no fallback narrative. No, I was guided. No, the timing wasn't right. Whatever happened next would belong to me completely. That responsibility was heavy. But it was also clarifying. I felt loss immediately. The kind you don't see but feel in your chest. Futures that evaporated the moment I committed. Versions of myself that would never exist now, no matter how carefully I imagined them. Waiting had allowed me to keep them alive indefinitely. Choosing killed them. And yet, something unexpected happened beneath that grief. The noise stopped. The constant background tension, the readiness, the scanning, the internal delay, faded. My life stopped feeling provisional. Days gained weight. Actions gained direction. Even mistakes felt more honest than the safety I had hidden in before. I realized then what waiting for a sign had really done to me. It had trained me to distrust my own judgment. To believe that my decisions required external validation to be legitimate. That acting without certainty was irresponsible. That intuition had to be proven before it could be used. I had mistaken hesitation for wisdom. Wisdom doesn't wait forever. It acts knowing it might be wrong, and accepts that cost. I won't pretend choosing solved everything. It didn't. Some days I still wonder about the lives I didn't choose. Some nights regret whispers that maybe another path would have been better. That I should have waited just a little longer. But now, that voice has an answer. At least this life is mine. I no longer live in anticipation of permission. I don't look for signs in every pause or silence. I understand now that clarity isn't something that arrives before action. It's something that forms because you acted. Waiting kept me safe. Choice made me real. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself, standing still, scanning for certainty, telling yourself you'll move once you feel sure, hear this clearly. There is no sign coming to rescue you from responsibility. There is only the moment you decide that your life is worth risking your certainty for. I waited for a sign that never came. When I finally moved without one, I didn't feel enlightened. I felt exposed. But I also felt present, fully, imperfectly, undeniably present in my own life. And that presence, even with fear, even with regret, even with unanswered questions, is something waiting never gave me. I didn't need a sign. I needed to stop asking for permission to live.